we can truly relate with one another. We can truly have a dialogue. We can truly connect and see each other for who we really are. And so this connection that we have builds that foundation, inspires that respect that we have for one another. That respect that we have for one another, we should have for one another as fellow Americans, recognizing that, you know, our founders built into our Constitution and our Bill of Rights these freedoms that are guaranteed to every one of us, freedoms bestowed upon us by our Creator, freedoms that apply to every one of us, regardless of all these things that are unfortunately in today's political climate being used to tear us apart, whether it be through identity politics or other things that are further perpetuating a narrative of hatred and bigotry and disrespect. So when we look at how we bridge the divides in this country, because really what it comes down to is solving problems, right? It comes down to making sure that our government is working for us, that our government is working for we the people. And by doing so is hearing and listening to the concerns that we have, that people are struggling with and dealing with in their everyday lives across this country, and then coming together to find the best solutions to those problems. This hasn't been happening for so long because of the hyper-partisan gridlock that we have in Washington, where it's more about the political win rather than the win, delivering wins for the people. Why it's so important for us to stand strongly rooted in this foundation. This is why at every one of our events that we have, every town hall that we have pocket-sized copies of the Constitution and Bill of Rights at the door. Just because this is so important for us to keep at the forefront, that our Constitution begins with those powerful 3 words for a good reason. We the people. Not some the people or those other ones are the people, we the people. That must be the singular focus of the leaders who are elected by the people to serve them, not to serve one party or the other party, but to serve the people. Now, don't get me wrong, we the people will have a lot of different ideas on what those solutions to these challenges and these problems looks like. We'll have maybe big differences on how we feel the path should look like towards solving these problems. The problem is that now, in the culture of divisiveness that exists, instead what we're seeing is one side says, well, this has got to be the way to go. The other side, nope, that's wrong. This has got to be the way to go. And they just fight, talking at each other rather than dialoguing with each other. This change to get past this divisiveness and to begin to build these bridges between us starts with this foundation. And it starts with this change happening around our Thanksgiving dinner tables, in our families, communities, jobs, and so forth. And it also starts with the top, with the kind of culture of leadership that we set in this country. As president, you have my personal commitment that I will lead always putting people ahead of partisan politics, putting the well-being of the people and our country ahead of special interests or corporate profits. Surrounding myself, building a cabinet and building a team of people, not based on one party or the other, but based on bringing together people who share this same commitment, who can bring a different and unique background of experience to actually being able to accomplish our goal and objective of solving problems and delivering results for the American people. In our questions, we'll be able to get into different issues. I want to cover just a few of them that I think that I hear are some of the most often asked questions in different town hall meetings and as we've been traveling across your state. I think the one that it comes up the most is healthcare. In Washington, this is an issue that is cast as one side versus the other, but what we know to be true is that for every one of us, we seek to have the peace of mind that who's got a great job that gives you a great income, or you're someone who may be between jobs, struggling to make ends meet, or maybe you're working 2 or 3 jobs and you're still struggling to put a roof over your head, living in fear of that healthcare emergency that will break the bank and put you out on the street. In this country, where we are currently and have for so long been spending far more for healthcare than any other modern day industrialized developed country in the world, but we are still continuously rated with worse outcomes, we know that something's got to change. These are things that we can all agree on. We have different ideas on what that change looks like, but I think we can agree on these objectives and the goals. We've got to get rid of this greed-driven healthcare system that puts the interests of profits for big pharma and big insurance ahead of the interests of the quality healthcare being delivered for the people. You have my guarantee that in my administration, big insurance and big pharma will have no seat at the table as we are looking to pass our healthcare reform policies. It's the biggest and most important change that we can make. This will accomplish a couple of really important things. Number one, immediately, we can bring down the overall cost of healthcare. The vision that I think we should pursue as a country with healthcare reforms is modeled loosely after the healthcare system in Australia that has consistently been ranked far ahead of the United States in the quality of healthcare outcomes by ensuring guaranteed healthcare for everyone while allowing the option, if you want to choose supplementary private insurance or your employer is offering you an insurance plan, you can make the choice about what healthcare, where you would like to get your healthcare from. Unlike what you may hear from other people or in the media, this is not a false choice between the two. We see how it works, and it works well in other countries. And there's no reason to believe that we here in the United States cannot achieve this goal of ensuring and guaranteeing quality health care for everyone. By cutting out the big profits of big insurance, we automatically already bring down the cost that we are currently paying in this healthcare system. And we make sure that we utilize the leverage that we have as the #1 purchaser of prescription drugs on this planet to negotiate lower prescription drug prices with big pharma, to actually bring down the cost that we are currently paying. And that's making it so difficult right now for people to be able to get the medicines that they need. I think we enact the kind of reforms to our patent system that makes it so big pharma can no longer block generic drug companies from being able to produce these drugs at a lower price when their initial patent expires. I think there are very practical solutions that we can bring about, once again, when we are looking at, hey, let's put the interests of the people first. The environment is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. It's the reason why I first got involved with politics in Hawaii. I was 21 years old when I first ran for the state legislature. I had already, grown up in Hawaii. My playground was the ocean and the mountains, and I didn't have to be taught that, well, this is a political issue you should care about, place that you grow up in, right? You care about Mother Nature and all that she provides for us. And so that was a driving issue and something I was and continue to be very, very passionate about. And one that too, unfortunately, has become such a divisive issue where people make it sound like you have to choose between protecting the environment or having a strong economy. Or, I agree. Using words that unfortunately have become very divisive. Climate change is one that, depending on where you fall, is either a call to action to protect the environment, or for others, it's a call to throw up your defenses because you don't think climate change is real. Set that all aside and just face the reality that every single one of us as human beings has basic necessities. Start with clean water. Able to survive if you're living with an oxygen mask every single day, but clean air is something we in this country should be guaranteed. making sure that we're preserving these beautiful places that we get to call home, preserving these open spaces, making sure that our kids and their kids and their kids will have a safe place to be able to call home. Looking at the environmental threats that exist and saying, how can we prevent these threats from increasing, and how do we preserve the limited natural resources that we have? If we start this conversation here, then we find that, hey, we actually have a lot more in common that we care about than we may realize. This creates the opportunity for us to then look at, okay, well, what are some of the policies that we can put in place at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, to be able to protect the health and well-being of ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities. I think these are two examples of many where if we just get away from the trigger words, the divisive words, and actually just focus on the issue at hand. Let's focus on the root cause of the problem. Let's focus on the things that we all care about. And then we can begin the dialogue about what steps we can agree on to be able to make progress on these issues. There's a number of others that I want to open it up to in our discussion. I'll close with one issue, though, that is extremely important and central to every other issue that we face. That issue is our national security and the cost of war. The existential threat that exists for every single one of us, the greatest threat that is because of how we, the people, have been failed by our leaders, that has brought us to this point where nuclear strategists are pushing that doomsday clock 2 minutes before midnight closer to that point of catastrophe, because we have increasing tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, because we're seeing how North Korea continues to go unchecked in increasing their nuclear weapons capability, the proliferation of more nuclear weapons. We see how over different administrations, an erosion of powerful treaties that were put in place to begin to reduce the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the world. Under this administration, obviously, we saw how the Trump administration tore up the INF treaty that Reagan and Gorbachev negotiated over 30 years ago, something that people said was absolutely impossible back then, but that went very far in making us and the world a more safe place to live. There is another treaty called the New START Treaty. It was negotiated between the United States and Russia that's supposed to expire in February of 2021, just weeks after the next president will be sworn in to office. This administration has no intentions of reauthorizing this very important treaty, which will only further, if it's allowed to expire, further the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We had a huge wake-up call in Hawaii last year when we got a missile alert that our civil defense sent out across over 1 million cell phones all across our state saying, missile incoming, seek shelter immediately, this is not a drill. We thought that our loved ones, our family, and our friends had just minutes to live. If you can just stop and pause for a moment and think about if we got that alert here tonight, right now, raise your hand. How many of you know where you would go? There is no shelter. This is the problem, is we're in a situation where we're facing escalating tensions. There are more and more nuclear weapons in the world, but there is no shelter. This incident that happened in Hawaii for me was a huge personal wake-up call and a major event that motivated me to run for president, to do something about it, to make it so that no family has to go through what our families went through in Hawaii, that no one has to live in fear of this threat happening, which is why I would, within the first week of being in office, call for a summit to begin the talks between the United States and Russia and China to start to de-escalate these tensions, to be able to start making progress towards working towards achieving that goal of reducing the numbers of nuclear weapons in the world. The second issue related to our national security is the cost of war. The cost of war, for me as a soldier and as a veteran, takes a very, it has a huge personal impact. Just on the drive here, I made a call to the wife of a soldier from Hawaii who was just killed in Afghanistan not more than a week ago. He was a helicopter pilot, and he and his co-pilot were killed. Their helicopter had some malfunction and crashed and was destroyed while they were providing some overwatch security for a ground element that was on a mission in Afghanistan. She had not been married a year yet. A young woman in her early 20s who said she didn't expect to be a widow this early in her life. There have been far too many families like this woman, Mackenzie, who've had to say their final goodbye to their loved one with a coffin that's come home draped with the American flag. We must never, ever, ever forget those service members and their families who make the greatest sacrifice of all in service to our country. And we must honor them. We must honor them by ensuring that those who are willing to pay the ultimate price to serve our country are only sent on missions that are truly worthy of their great sacrifice. Missions that serve the national security interests of our country. Missions that serve to keep the American people safe. This is why we enlist. This is why we take that oath, why we are willing to lay our lives down in service to our country and our people. It is a disservice to those men and women in uniform who make that promise to send them to fight in unnecessary regime change wars, needlessly putting them in harm's way. Wars that we've seen in places like Iraq and Syria, and the war now that's been going on for so long in Afghanistan. Wars that are not furthering the national security interests in our country, and some of them actually undermining those interests as we see terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda being strengthened as a result. There's a cost that's being paid by every one of us. We as taxpayers have spent over $6 trillion since 9/11 alone, paying for these unnecessary regime change wars. Every time you've been told or read in the newspaper, well, there's not enough money for health care. There's not enough money to make sure our kids are getting the best education possible. There's not enough money to pay our teachers what they deserve to teach our kids. Not enough money for infrastructure, to fix our roads, to make sure that here in the United States of America, every single person has clean water to drink. Or just start here in New Hampshire to make sure every person who lives here in New Hampshire has clean water to drink. Time and time again, there's not enough money to take care of our communities and serve our people. But somehow there is an endless amount of money and a blank check being written, not to make sure our military is strong. We've got to have a strong and ready military capable of doing the job that we sign up to do to keep the American people safe, to go out and defeat and destroy those who threaten that safety and security. But that's not what so many of these wars have been about, unfortunately. And that's what's got to change. That's what I will do as president, bringing the experience that I have of serving in Congress now for 7 years, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Armed Services Committee, on the Homeland Security Committee, working and providing oversight over the Department of Defense, Department of State, working with different military commands, meeting with leaders of other countries to end these wasteful, unnecessary regime change wars. Work to end this new Cold War and arms race and redirect our taxpayer dollars towards actually serving the needs of the people here at home, towards actually solving these problems that have plagued us for so long, working towards and achieving that balance of making sure we have a strong defense, national security, and peace This is the work that I will do, walking in ready to do the job of your President Commander-in-Chief on day one, not bending to the interests of the foreign policy establishment in Washington or the military-industrial complex, and never wavering from that commitment of putting the well-being and the interests of our people and our country first. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for joining me. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's have a conversation. Let's hear what's on your mind. I'm going to come to you next. Yes, ma'am. We'll start with you. That's okay.
You were recently on Joe Rogan, and one of the big comments in the comment section was, wouldn't it be great if Joe Rogan hosted a debate between you and the other progressive candidates, Sanders and Warren and Yang? And I think that would be amazing. Are there any rules that keep you from doing that? I know the DNC doesn't really allow debates, but could you have a joint interview or something of that nature?
First of all, I love that you are a Joe Rogan fan. Thank you. I think it would be a great idea, and I think it would be an amazing and interesting and very real conversation. Unfortunately, the DNC does have rules that would prohibit that sort of thing. And the punishment, if you break those rules, is they don't allow you to play in their debates ever again. Well, for this election. We can appear at joint events so long as none of us share the same stage at the same time. So that's where you see sometimes there are different forums that they'll have multiple candidates showing up at, but none of us are actually on that same stage at the same time. But this is one of the problems, I think. And this was a rule that was implemented when I was vice chair of the DNC back in 2016 that I both privately first and later publicly strongly disagreed with. Because not only at that time were they limiting the number of debates, but they introduced this new thing, and I forget what the fancy name for it is, but basically where you're punishing candidates for being involved with conversations that will better help inform and engage more people to actually come out and vote. That to me is counter to and undermines the interest of having an informed and engaged, thriving democracy. I don't, I think what they would say is that they're trying to make sure this is a controlled and orderly process. But the problem is, instead you've got the DNC that partners with corporate media to host these debates that give us as candidates maybe 60, 75 seconds if they're generous to answer certain questions. Where even in the last debate, we were promised, hey, everybody's gonna get an equal amount of time, an equal amount of questions. That clearly did not happen. It hasn't happened yet in any of these debates. And it ends up being more of a political reality TV show than a real conversation that you, viewers, people who are looking to say, hey, I need to know more information on each of these candidates before I make my decision. And I hear from a lot of people really frustrated and who are just changing the channel because they're not getting that kind of information at all, actually. And I think you've seen that. There's been, I think the first debate had something like 22 million viewers, and this last one had, I think, just over 6 million. So people are looking to other outlets like to get more. Yeah.
Give you an easy one. Candidate Donald Trump was famous for railing against President Obama for his golf days. I think Obama averaged 35 days a year over his 8-year period. President Donald Trump is well over 105 days a year in his golf excursions. I'm going to go out on a limb here that golf is not your game. But as president, how many surf days will you allow? And what is your go-to surf place on the East Coast?
You had to go there. I think that we should make it really easy and just have a wave pool put in somewhere in DC, and that way, you know, let me go. Just instead of going to the gym one day, I'll go surf for an hour and then, you know, get back to work. My favorite surf spot on the East Coast. I haven't done a whole lot, to be honest with you. I've been a little busy, but a reporter of ours sent me a direct message on Instagram saying, "Hey, I heard you're coming to Charleston. Let me know if you want to go surfing." And I said, "Yes, please. I'll wake up as early as I gotta wake up." But the beautiful thing was that we were able to go surfing with a group of veterans who are actively. It's a beautiful program where they're bringing veterans together who are struggling with that transition and post-traumatic stress, and introducing them to the healing powers of the ocean. And it was really an amazing thing. The surf was terrible. The wind was howling. That was beside the point. It was still a beautiful, beautiful thing. Thank you. Yes, sir, in the back.
Yes. You've talked a lot about issues. You're very well informed. The biggest obstacle I can see for you as president is getting the Republicans to work with you. People like Mitch McConnell, for example, block everything that Democrats try to do.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to change the Republicans so that they're more cooperative in terms of helping you out? Otherwise, we'll just be at another standstill.
I got a magic wand for that. I think that the first of all, I think I think it's fair to say that across party lines, people are very frustrated and disenchanted with our government. Would you agree? Yes, I think everybody agrees with that. Because of that gridlock and the kind of blocking maneuvers that we are seeing from leaders in both political parties, where they only push something forward if it furthers the interests of their party or their people, no matter how good of an issue or idea it is. So this is what has to change. And it's got to change from both ends of the perspective. Number one, in changing the culture of leadership in Washington from the get-go. And for me, doing this by not only building, you know, what Abraham Lincoln would call a team of rivals in my cabinet, but actually beginning on day one by inviting leaders from both parties in the House and the Senate to come and begin to develop that relationship and let them know, hey, we've got to work together, away from the cameras, away from everything else, and have those meetings on a regular basis, at least once a month, so that we recognize, hey, we are working on Team America, not for one party or another, but we work for the people of this country, and we're going to find a way to get it done. But also really helping to people across this country raising the bar and demanding more from their elected leaders. And if they're not delivering for the people, then it's voting them out of office. This is something that's not just theoretical for me. When I was first elected to Congress in 2012, freshman Democrat coming from a very small state with no seniority, coming into a very strong Republican majority. And I was told from the get-go, don't even try to pass legislation. Don't even try to get any amendments done, because Republicans are in charge. They've got no reason to help you. You're a Democrat from a strong Democratic state. They got nothing for you. I refused to take that information. I set it aside, and I began by figuring out, okay, how can I start to build relationships with my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues? How can I start to bridge that divide, introduce myself to them? So I started with what I think is the most powerful universal language, which is food. Simple. My mother makes the most amazing macadamia nut toffee in the world. And so I asked her, I called her up, she's in Hawaii, I asked if she would make 434 boxes of her toffee for every single one of my new colleagues and soon to be new friends. And she said, gosh, I think that's a great idea. Yes, absolutely. Ask, will you make another 435 bigger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. And she paused only, I could tell she's thinking like, okay, I gotta go to Costco and buy this many more pounds of macadamia nuts and butter and sugar. But she said, yes, of course, that's so important. And so she got to work in Hawaii. She's chopping macadamia nuts, stirring 2 pots of toffee on the stove. My dad is a self-appointed quality control officer. He took a little slice out of every single pan. I'm not even joking. And as they were doing that, as we were delivering these little gifts of aloha to every one of my new colleagues, how quickly I got a response. That on the House floor, the time when we're all together in one place for votes, that I had senior ranking Republicans from powerful committees making that long walk across the aisle from the Republican side to the Democratic side, finding me and saying, thank you so much. I ate all the toffee. I need more to take home with me this weekend. And then most importantly saying, tell me what's going on in your district. Tell me what are the issues that you want to get to work on. I work on this committee, or I'm the chairman of that committee. Let's find a way to work together. Simple gesture of respect. Reaching out. Not because I found, well, this person agrees with me, forget everybody else who doesn't. No, reaching out based on respect. Building that relationship. Relationships that have spanned the whole time I've been in Congress, the first 6 years of which have been in a Republican majority, and enabled me to actually get things done. I passed the very first bill that I introduced as a member of Congress into law through the House and the Senate, signed by President Obama within my first year in office, something everybody said would be impossible to do. Passed amendments to bills, amendments that were called dead on arrival when I introduced them. One to the education reauthorization bill that had to do with the Native Hawaiian Education Act, reauthorizing that act. I was told Republicans aren't going to push this through. They will actively oppose it, which the leadership did. When my amendment was coming up for a vote, the memo went out, the whip memo went out saying Republicans vote against the Gabbard Amendment. Because I had established relationships with my colleagues across the aisle, I started getting phone calls, text messages, people stopping me in the halls. People were returning my calls. And they were saying, hey, Tulsi, tell me why I should vote for this. They're saying I should vote against it. What is this really all about? And it gave me the opportunity to make my pitch, why this was important, not just to kids in Hawaii, but kids across the country. And guess what? Not every one of them ended up voting with me, but a whole lot of them did, and we got that amendment passed with a very strong majority vote. I would not have been able to get those calls returned if I hadn't begun that relationship by reaching out with this simple gesture of respect. Thank you.
Last question, folks.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask about the economy,
Yeah,
in particular green jobs and agriculture.
yeah,
Also, you have mentioned that you might consider a UBI.
yeah.
Which about the UBI, so just your general vision of like the economic transition that we're up against here.
Sure. I do want to try to grab a couple more questions, so I'll try to keep this brief. I think the biggest problem with our economic policy, especially as it relates to tax and trade, is that it's not a fair system, and it disproportionately benefits the largest corporations and multinational corporations to the detriment of small businesses very often, who are the backbone of our economy. And so that's the big paradigm shift that we need to make as we're forming these policies as it relates to our taxes and our tax code, and as it relates to our trade and tariff policy. I think we're all very familiar with the statistics that are being thrown every time. I think it's good to remember that corporations like Amazon and Netflix make a ton of money, huge profits, zero taxes. My parents are small business owners for a long time now and understand how tough it is to keep the doors open as a small business owner, how much your heart and soul goes into doing that work, and it gives you a great reward that goes beyond just the profits that you're making, but you're struggling just to keep the lights on, to make sure your employees are paid well, that you're able to help provide for them and deliver that service or that product to your customer. It's tough. The Small Business Administration in and of itself lacks the resources and real programs that can really help provide that benefit and empowerment and opportunity to more small businesses and entrepreneurs. So that's the paradigm shift that I think we need to make as we look at these policies. And that needs to cross into our Farm Bill and our agriculture policy. I just introduced legislation in Congress that has to do with encouraging and incentivizing more entrepreneurship in small and regional farms, as well as empowering more of the urban gardens and urban farms that we're seeing trying to pop up in cities like Detroit and Chicago and other big cities where you really do have food deserts where people don't have access to healthy, affordable food that's grown locally. The bureaucracy and the laws make it really, really hard for people who are trying to do the right thing and better their communities. On UBI, I think it's a really good idea. I support UBI. I think I'm still working through the numbers on exactly what would be the best way to pay for it. The jury is out. I think there's a lot of pros and cons in the argument about the value-added tax and how, the one that I'm trying to figure out and get past is very often it is small businesses who are hurt the most by that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
As you're aware, New Hampshire has a tremendous problem with opiate issues.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think is being missed is that from 2014 to now, babies that are born in the state of New Hampshire have almost doubled that are going to be affected by opiates. They are born addicted. And this is going to translate later into higher special education costs that will extend throughout their life, actually.
That's true.
And currently, our special education programs are extremely underfunded.
Yeah.
And in particular, in property-poor towns like this community, it's devastating us.
Yeah.
What could you offer communities like ours and the states like ours that are going to be facing this problem?
Yeah. Thank you for raising this issue. You're actually the first person that I've heard make that connection between what happens to the next generation of people who have fallen victim to this opioid epidemic and connecting that with this huge shortage of special education funding that I think it's present in so many communities across this state and across the country. I would just add on to that the extreme underfunding of school counselors and mental health professionals within our schools, even as there is a growing and increasing need for that. So I think we've got to approach the existing crisis with two really important things. Number one is actually holding these perpetrators of this epidemic criminally responsible for their actions in lying and cheating to proliferate their drugs on our streets just to make a profit. I have legislation in Congress called the Opioid Accountability Act that would put the tools in the hands of federal prosecutors to do just that against companies and executives like Purdue Pharma, for example, who are trying their very best to get off easy in some of the state lawsuits that are taking place right now, and taking the money that would come from that federal prosecution and solely dedicating it, earmarking it for treatment and recovery. As we've traveled across New Hampshire and visited some of the recovery homes and centers, time and time again, we're hearing a lot of the same things. There's just not enough funding to meet the need to help those who are trying to walk this path towards recovery. There is a disproportionate lack of beds available for women who are looking for help. What to speak of the recognition that recovery extends so far beyond just the initial 28 days that you may get in a recovery center, where you've got months and maybe sometimes years before someone gets back to being able to provide for themselves or their families, provide a roof over their heads. So that resources and accountability for the existing crisis that we are facing and making sure to address the specific problem that you're talking about, I think there is a responsibility that the federal government has to provide resources, especially in the area of special education, that make it so these children who need help are not dependent on the varying local laws and the different funding streams that come from different counties, towns, or states. you know, I think it's important that we respect states' rights and how they determine their boards of education and funding, and that's a local issue. But I think there is a responsibility at the federal level to ensure that no.
I want to talk about poverty, and in this community, I actually work as a special educator at the school.
Oh, thank you for your service.
It's fine. I'm not here. People, you know, it's here and it's around the country. They're hurting, man. I just want to know when you're president, would you put a priority on, you know, making sure that we try to people get into rooms and they get beat down and they get beat down.
Struggling the hardest, who really need the most help. And there's no single bill that will solve this problem. As you rightly said, there are systemic issues within our entire system that impacts almost every single element of our lives that contributes to this struggle that shouldn't exist in the wealthiest and greatest nation in the world, that so many people are being left behind because the system helps the very few, the rich and the powerful the most, leaving everybody else behind. Exactly, it is inequality. So this is where I believe that I keep coming back. I think the universal basic income can play a big role in being an equalizing element. It's not going to solve all the problems. It's not going to provide you with enough money to live off of, but it provides a layer of economic security to be able to help address some of these issues. But we've got to get to the heart of, again, we're talking about the inequalities and unfair systems within our tax code. We've got to deal with the extreme affordable housing shortage. People who don't have the money are not able to get the care and the medicine they need. Families, and they can't afford to buy the insulin that they need here at home. And these stories, there are so many of them. Every single aspect and element of our lives is being detrimentally impacted by a system in our government that serves the rich and powerful and leaves the rest of us behind. This is where, and we didn't get into this, and I'll close on this issue, which is the issue of really the corruption within our own government because of big special interest corporate money in our political system, where you've got leaders in Washington who will spend more time with lobbyists and collecting PAC checks from people in DC than they are in spending time with people in their district or in actually working to get things done. That alone will make a major difference. We stop taking PAC checks for our politicians in Washington, number one. Number two, you make it so that no member of Congress or senior staffer in our government is allowed to become a lobbyist when they leave the government. Make it so they can't get or appointed political officials who will go in and do their time in public service where they take a major pay cut and then go get a big payout, oftentimes in the industries that are supposed to be regulating or providing oversight over. We've got to deal with ending this corruption within our own government and make sure, and this is my commitment, that not only with my cabinet, but setting this culture of leadership within our government, that if you're not there with the sole express intention and commitment of serving the people, then you don't belong in our government. Go do something else with your life. Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish we had time for more questions. I appreciate you all being here. This has been a wonderful conversation. I want to introduce Vince to say a couple of words here about what our campaign is doing in New Hampshire. We need your help. Our campaign takes no money from PACs, takes no money from lobbyists. We are a people-powered. Go ahead.
I'm Vince. So, you know, I'm not different than anyone else. I'm 30 years old. I live in Nashua. I've been there about 6 years. You know, I get up, I go to work at 8, come back at 5, do whatever in between, especially this year. But yeah, the idea is, you know, in 2015 for me is when I first heard of Tulsi. I mean, when do you see a politician go for the integrity move and not the careerist move? So, you know, that caught my attention. I followed her. By the time I thought it was in the bag. Like, I thought that was it. Like, this is great that we finally have one. And then I turned on the news, a couple talk shows, and I saw, oh, it's gonna be like that. And so, you know, I'm healthy. I have a job. I have some time. If I don't get up, who else is gonna do this? You know, who's gonna help out? So I put my name in at tulsi2020.com. A week later, I got a call. I was sign waving once a week. I do a little bit more than that now, but the idea is because there's no PAC money, we have an advantage, right? A lot of people think it's a disadvantage, but where we've come to so far has been with volunteers. I can tell you I've canvassed with retired folk, senior citizens, single mothers, a couple of pregnant people, you know, the students. I mean, it's literally everyone, all shapes, sizes, and colors. So we want to offer you the opportunity, and we have two volunteers on the side. They both happen to be called Dave. They're gonna hand out these things. They're called pledge cards. And here's the thing. I understand some of you have lives, don't have much time to spare, but something as simple as talking to two people about what you've heard today would be considered part of our movement. Another option is a house party. If you want Tulsi to come in and kind of do one of these things in your house, we'd love to do it. And basically everything in between those two things and any ideas you might have, please write them down on this, return them to Dossie, who's in the back. Hey, Dossie. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll give it back to Tulsi.
Thank you very much, Vince. Vince is a little humble. He is working very hard to help spread our message of service above self and putting people first pretty much every hour of the day that he's not at his job. And I think I take him away from his job sometimes too. So I'd love to invite you to join us, whether in small ways or large ways. Every single person that you're able to talk to and to share maybe what you heard here tonight, or if you've already decided to support me, share with them why you feel I would best serve you as president. That can have a huge impact and help to continue to grow and build our movement. Thank you so much. If you want to come and just say hi to me, we've built some time in to allow for that, or take a picture if you would like to do so. I think we are just kind of line up on this side of the house. I want to say thanks again to Diane, who hosted us here in this beautiful community center tonight, and thanks to all of you again for your time and for being here. Thank you so much. Have a great evening and a great weekend. Aloha. Thank you.
Come on, your recipes for the
If you didn't get a pledge
coffee
card,
and also
raise
the
your hand
gravy.
if you like one.
Okay. Thanks.
You at the convention.
I thought she looked familiar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
Awesome.
And I haven't heard, it must be on your website about your gun, because it's my concern the safety in our schools.
Yeah.
I mean, I know kids who are not safe in their schools.
Yeah.
What's your short
There
plan?
is some information on my website, but the down and dirty of it is, I think we can and should uphold our Second Amendment rights while also ensuring sensible safety laws and regulations in place to help prevent the kinds of tragedies that we've been seeing happening too often in our schools. I actually just introduced another bill a few weeks ago in Congress. It may not be on the website yet, but it has to do specifically with school safety.
I'll do some research.
Okay, basically what it does, there's no information that's collected about what's happening and why these school shootings are happening. This will start to help us answer those
And
questions.
I'm also the founder of the New Hampshire Student Voice Organization, and we're working on a mental health bill.
Fantastic, very good. Thanks for your leadership, Tyler. Nice to meet you. How are you, sir? Nice to see you. Always a pleasure.
This hat has been on the cover of the online edition of Rolling Stone
Wow.
for the People's Climate March.
Yeah.
And I will post.
Was your head wearing the hat at the time?
Indeed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I would be honored to have my picture taken with one
Thank
who
you.
has been working on the dream
Yes.
that I was working on that day.
It would be my honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Your camera went away.
Oh,
Oh.
Whoa.
what do we got? Oh, you timed out.
Oh. All right. Oh. Push the button on the back.
There we go. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. There you are.
All righty.
Thank you.
you so much.
Tulsi, you got my heart.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Keep it up.
Always.
Always. Thank you so much.
I'm a hugger.
All right. What's your name?
My name is Mason.
Nice
So
to
thank
meet
you for your service.
Thank you.
I have a special request. We're
Okay.
here from our
Is this your friend?
Yes, we're
Hey,
together.
what's your name?
I'm James.
James. Nice to meet you.
We're here from our government and politics class
Okay.
in high school. I was wondering if you could film like just a shout out.
That's all right.
Ready? 1, 2.
That's all right. You on?
Yep.
Aloha and hello to Mr. J's government and politics class. You have two fine representatives from your class here, and we just finished a great town hall. I want to invite more of you to come and join us very soon.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Just one
Thank
regular
you.
picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ready? 1,